It's my pleasure to have actor Hugh Kermode with me today. Hugh narrated the audiobook version of Liberty Bound and did a fabulous job. In the world of traditional publishing, audiobooks are made for all books, but for indie publishing, they're quite rare. So having an established voice artist record Liberty Bound has made a huge difference. So Hugh, thank you for joining me today.
Absolute pleasure.
You recorded Liberty Bound remotely due to lockdown, so I never got to thank you in person. All 5-star reviews so far, and all commentating on the excellent quality of the narration, so thank you very much.
Well, and that you are most kind for writing it, and are those people that gave us 5 stars as well. That's great, thank you.
So today I'm hoping that you can share your experiences and expertise in recording audiobooks. But first, if we can kick off, if you could clarify whether you are considered an actor or voice actor or voice artist, and is there a difference?
Wow, this is straight in there with a sort of acting therapy.
The jugular.
Who are you? What do you?
Yes.
It's a really good question, actually. I trained as an actor and I worked as an actor for many years, but the last 20 years has been spent mainly in front of or next to a microphone in recording studios, radio drama, all sorts of stuff in studios. I suppose I do more work in studios. I am more of my income comes from voice acting than from on stage or telly. But I don't know if we need the distinction. I think nearly every actor does some voice work, and I imagine what you think of as a voice actor trained as an actor to do stage and screen and theatre. That is stage. You know what I mean? So I appreciate maybe the distinction for us is probably less important than it is for an audience. I think we consider we're still sort of we are still actors, and that's what I would refer to myself as an actor. That's the short answer.
When you're on stage, is it the same qualities that you bring to a performance that you would do in front of a microphone in a studio?
It's got to be the same level of concentration and the same level of detail and the same research and the same background work. It's obviously different. You get the chance to make mistakes in a studio which can be corrected and no one would ever know. You can choose the best performance and stick it together, which obviously you can't in the theatre, and that's one of the joys of the theatre as well, the fact that you see everything warts and all. You know, it's an experience that will only exist once, that particular performance you're seeing. So it's a different side of the same job.
Of course, you have the atmosphere of an audience.
Yes. Sometimes quite a whiffy atmosphere as well, depending on where you're playing. Yeah.
So let's look at recording of audiobooks. When you record one, what steps do you do to prepare prior to recording?
The essential one is to read the book. It might sound a bit obvious, but there are occasions, there are anecdotes from other. I produce audiobooks as well with other readers reading them. And sometimes it's you're aware that maybe not quite so much preparation has gone in as there should be, and it's different as to that level of preparation is different depending on whether it's fiction or non-fiction, whether you're looking to do because obviously non-fiction you tend not to do character voices. Be a slightly odd non-fiction book if you did, although it might be quite fun. So yeah, the way you would prepare a script or prepare a book is different from whether it's fiction or non-fiction. But the essential thing is to go through. Let's assume it's fiction. Let's assume it's Liberty Bound, which I've got to say I absolutely loved reading. It was great fun to read. I loved reading it initially, even before prepping the book for reading out loud. And the fun of that is to go through and find the characters, work out where those characters are, not just within the plot and the world that you've created, but where they're going to sit in terms of my voice, my tones, whether it's a head voice or a lower voice, are they male or female? You've got to make those decisions in the preparation stage. Sometimes you get halfway through and you go, actually, that character would be better done a slightly different way. Again, with audiobooks, you've got the opportunity to change that if it really needs changing. So so preparing, reading, marking up. Actually, is my iPad? My iPad is here. Bear with me 2 seconds. One moment, caller. I pulled up the script, Liberty Bound script. I'm going to turn the screen down so it's not quite so bright, otherwise you won't be able to see it. Let's see if this works. I need to move something in Zoom so I can see whether this is going to work. Yes, that works. Okay. Would help if I did that though, wouldn't it? That is how I would mark something up. That's quite early on in the book. So you can see there, maybe you can, maybe you can't.
Yeah,
we've got the scene. You can, okay. So we've got the scene very, very early on, and Vassal and Finbal are reacting, talking to each other. So I've got Vassal's there in yellow, so that's his direct speech in marked up in yellow. Finbal's in green, and any references to the way the line is spoken. So, for example, I think mumbled. I can't remember now. Where is it saying? Demanded, mumbled, growled, mouthed, bellowed. I tend to underline with a little red line, so I know who's speaking, and I can immediately see what's going to inform that way of delivering the line. So you imagine that takes a fair amount of time to do that, and that's one of the issues with audiobooks. Say an average book is 90,000 words. That's about 10 hours of finished audio. It's about 9,000 words is about an hour, in my experience. That's pretty much the same whether it's fiction or non-fiction. Interestingly, you think it might be take longer to do fiction, but actually it's pretty much the same. That 1 hour's worth of audio is probably going to take you an hour and a half to read, because there'll be mistakes, there'll be a plane flying over, the dog will decide to try and get in the studio, all sorts of things. So that's an hour and a half to record an hour. But the preparation time is probably at least that again. So a 10-hour book, you're probably looking at 30 hours in total to read the book, prepare it, mark it up, then read it. And then the editing, depending on who does it and how it's done, it varies. Probably somewhere between the same as the total duration, maybe a bit less, maybe. So you're looking towards 35, 40 hours possibly in total for a 10-hour book. So yeah, the preparation is really important.
I mean, you've covered what my next question was going to be in terms of ensuring the consistency of a character throughout. And you did a wonderful job with both Finbal and Aminatra as the core characters as they develop. I mean, as a character, some of the positive feedback I've had around Finbal particularly is his character develops through the story. I mean, is that something that you recognise through the reading and then are able to portray that? So at the start he's more of an aggressive authoritarian figure who is cruel, etc. The more he sees of the world, the more he understands the world, the more sympathetic you feel towards him and the more sympathetic he becomes as a character.
Yeah, I mean, well, clearly, without being over-flattering, you wrote that. I mean, that's so it is there. So, you've got to follow the guide that the authors got for you. But yeah, you will notice that as you're going through, hopefully. So the words wouldn't do that naturally, but it also, yes, the tone of voice will change as the character changes. But that's sort of implicit in the lines.
So I guess those words like growl and bellow are less frequently used by
absolutely
characters.
Yeah. But they are really very helpful as something to hang a performance onto as well. As to you see those words coming up, those words describing the way that the individuals are speaking, and because sometimes they go against what they're saying. Yeah. Sometimes you'll assume that the next line is going to be shouted, but it's not. So you've got to flag that up in your notes. Some people write up inflections, so they'll actually, as they're going through and preparing the book, they'll put in, is it an upward inflection linking to the next sentence? Is it a caesura pause that hangs in the air and then goes on somewhere else? I don't. And there's a reason for that. Years ago, I was doing some radio drama for BBC World Service, and the director there wonderful director called Sue Cockill, said, I was marking it up. She said, if you mark it up now in the preparation stage, if the performance has changed slightly, and each time you do it, it will be slightly different. If it's changed slightly, you're stuck. You're going to try and fix your performance to what you've already decided. She said, just as long as you know what that character's saying, as long as you know what the narrator's saying, you don't need to mark it up as much as you think you do. If it non-fiction, I do mark up more. Quite often, I've just finished quite a long series of history books, and they were very academic books, very long sentences that you really had to plot your way through because there were clauses and subclauses and parentheses. But in fiction, I think sometimes if you mark it up too much, this is not just an excuse for being lazy. If you mark it up too much, you can tie yourself down to a performance that you might want to change in the actual act of doing it.
Authors are often advised to read their work out loud at the editing stage. Now, can you give some trade secrets on how to read aloud and how to spot lines that need improving?
Gosh, have lots of coffee or tea or whatever it is, whatever caffeine-based drink of your choice. I think it's important to remember, have a picture as to where the character's voice sits in your body. That sounds terribly pompous and very actory, talking about acting, but actually, how close is the character to you? For example, I again, not only it's just an excuse for laziness. I don't think a listener to an audiobook necessarily wants to hear you do a million voices. What they want is the story, and a million voices sometimes gets in the way of the story. So find the 3 or 4 voices that work for you, that you can imagine a female voice that just feels female to you rather than necessarily sounds it. With all the best will in the world, I'm never going to sound like a 17-year-old girl, despite how hard I try. But it's so you've just got to imagine it, and that's part of the process for you as reading your own thing. Maybe if you imagine you see the character that you're portraying, that helps you to inhabit it a bit. Trade secrets, though, just punctuation is fascinating. You can over punctuate stuff, you can under punctuate stuff. I think it's better to under punctuate than over punctuate, so that when you read it, naturally we put pauses in. You don't necessarily need there to be a comma or a dash or a ... Somehow I put far too many ... dots into my writing. Yes, I mean, I don't know. Take it slow.
Is there a rhythm that you find you get into with a book that flows and you think this is well written and easy to read?
Yeah, I mean, yes. I mean, if you get through a couple of pages in a go without any sort of mistakes or fluffs or whatever, you know you're in the hands of a brilliant author, and you can because it's sometimes the shape of the sentence will trip you up if it's not well written. So the rhythm for yours was fascinating as well, though, because it really galloped along in places, and so I found myself actually having to go, just take your time here, because you don't necessarily want to play the same rhythm. You've got to still have, it's like reining back a horse. In order to cover the distance, you don't necessarily want to go flat out all the time. But the authors reading stuff aloud is fascinating, not least of all because of the proofing and the typo issue. I mean, I've done some books that have been in print for 30, 40 years, and you read them, you go, well, that's clearly a typo. When we do the process of recording, and then it's edited, and then it goes off, before it gets uploaded for listening, it goes off to a check listener, and the check listener will go through and they'll read it, and they're literally just checking whether you said the right word, the words that are on the page. You could give I could send some files off to a check listener, to 3 different check listeners, and they'll come back with 3 different reports that they've noticed 3 different things. Fascinating. It's a very it shouldn't be an inexact science, but we do miss things sometimes, and that's why we need as many people as possible. There's me, well, there's you, then there's the proofing stage that you would go through. Then there's me reading it out loud, which is a very good proofing stage, and I'll spot things, but I'll get things wrong as well. Then the checklist, then the editor will pick stuff up, and they'll come back to me for corrections. Then the check listener will listen. They'll go, oh no, you missed that. So there's multiple stages, but definitely an author reading stuff out loud, I think, is very, very valuable, not just to spot things that maybe you've made slight errors or things that don't work as well as they could, but just I think it's going to help you to flesh out the characters as well, to feel. I mean, did you read yours out loud when you?
No, I tried to, but I just didn't like the sound of my own voice, to be honest.
Well, don't worry about it. I mean, you know, the first time I heard my voice recorded, I didn't like my voice, and sometimes I still don't. You just, the more you do it, the more you'll get used to what it sounds like, and you accept it. And yeah, I think it is actually a very valuable exercise.
Yes, like all things, a bit of practice.
Yeah, yeah.
What other books have you been working on? You've told us about the history one that you've just.
Yeah, it was a whole. There's a fabulous historian called Eric Hobsbawm who died a few years ago, who wrote these fantastic books. The Age of series is the Age of Capital, the Age of Revolution. Wonderful, wonderful books. It was a great pleasure to be in his company for a very long time. There were 4 books. Bear with me a second. I'd go and get one off the shelf. Hang on, I'll get all 4 off the shelf. There we are. It's great to have the hard copies, and so these were just a joy to read. Obviously, I read them from PDFs on the iPad, but having the paper copy is really useful as well. Just to just to know how far through the book you are helps as well, because a PDF sometimes you go, oh, I'm doing rather well here. You think, oh, I've hardly touched it, but no. So that was great. Eric Hobsbawm, brilliant. I've done a lot of non-fiction around science. So Jim Al-Khalili's books about quantum physics, I've read those. It's not exactly my background, but I've learned a lot, some of which I understand and can remember. Recently, actually, the last book I completed I was dead chuffed to be asked to read 1984, which
another dystopian classic.
Another dystopian classic. My dystopian muscles were well warmed up after Liberty Bound, and that was I was going to say it's great fun. It wasn't fun, you know what I mean, but it was terrific. It's
appropriate for this year, maybe.
Very much so. Oh, but actually, there's a very interesting thing with 1984 in that there's an appendix to 1984 which the publisher wanted read as well, and the appendix talks about the construction of Newspeak. For those of you that know 1984, and those of you that don't, Newspeak is the language, the slimmed down language that sort of effectively controls
another sign of state
society.
Control.
Absolutely. But it discusses how Newspeak was created, and even talks about how the words were pronounced. And I would have assumed it was Newspeak, i.e. first syllable stress, Newspeak. But in the appendix, he talks about the fact they were equal stress, so it'd be Newspeak or Newspeak. So so if I hadn't read the appendix and prepared it, the whole book would have been read with the wrong stress on the words. So there are lots of examples of actors who've got to chapter 73 in a novel where they've been doing this, standard English character as their main character, and on the penultimate page it says Stephen, a Geordie by birth, and they go, oh. Back to the start then, and it has happened on occasions. So
I'm actually, for my sequel for Liberty Bound, I'm looking at how the English language may have changed in the future. So I contacted a gentleman called Kevin Stroud, who does a podcast about the history of the English language.
Oh wow!
And he's done a podcast about the future of English, looking at how it will change over time, and from losing H's and all those aspects to words. So that's quite a fascinating subject in its own right.
Well, have a look at the appendix of 1984 as well, because it's quite. I think I don't know what Orwell's background was in terms of literature. I mean, in terms of studying literature, or even studying linguistics. But he knows knew a hell of a lot about it. And he's very, very detailed and eloquent about how his language grew up. So
yeah. No, he was a great observer of humanity, I think.
very much so. Very much so.
So thank you for speaking to me today. It's been
Pleasure.
wonderful. Very insightful.
Thank you for writing the book.
My pleasure. So Liberty Bound is obviously available as an audio book on Audible, iTunes, Google Play, and many other platforms. And your other audio books that you've recorded, such as the Eric Hobsbawm one, are now available, I presume.
They are. Yeah, I mean, Audible is the main marketplace for those, but as there are other ones as well, as you mentioned. But yeah.
So I'd encourage people to go and visit there. And also, just to add, if you know of anyone with impaired vision or who is blind, then Liberty Bound is now available for free on the RNIB library.
Fantastic.
Hugh, thank you very much.
Absolute pleasure. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.